The morning sun cast long shadows across Yuna's driveway as she stood frozen behind her kitchen curtain. Through the thin fabric, she watched her husband, Dongmin, hurriedly stuffing bags into the trunk of his car while Minji, their daughter's babysitter, waited in the passenger seat. Yuna's hands gripped the counter edge, her knuckles turning white as she processed the scene unfolding before her. And if you want a handsome CEO in your life and love videos like this, subscribe to our channel to have 10 years of luck in your life. She had suspected something was wrong for months. The late nights at the office, the sudden business trips, the way Dongmin's phone always lay face down on tables. But seeing him leave with Minji transformed those suspicions into crushing reality. The coffee maker beeped behind her, its cheerful sound a jarring contrast to the moment her marriage crumbled. Their 6-year-old daughter, Sujin, sat at the dining table, methodically arranging her cereal pieces into patterns, unaware of the scene outside. Yuna forced herself to breathe normally, not wanting her daughter to sense the turmoil. She watched until Dongmin's car disappeared around the corner before pulling out her phone and typing a simple message. "We need to talk. Tonight." The day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Yuna went through the motions of her routine, dropping Sujin at school, attending her part-time job at the local art supply store, preparing dinner. Her movements were mechanical, her mind replaying the morning scene on endless loop. When Dongmin finally returned home that evening, the house felt different, as if the air itself had grown heavier. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table after Sujin had gone to bed. Dongmin's tie hung loosely around his neck, his usual confident posture replaced by a defensive slouch. "I can explain," he started, but Yuna raised her hand, silencing him. "How long?" Her voice remained steady, surprising even herself. Dongmin shifted in his chair. 6 months, he admitted, unable to meet her eyes. "It just happened. We were working late one night and working late." Yuna interrupted. "She was our daughter's babysitter, Dongmin. She was 19. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Dongmin launched into a series of explanations about feeling disconnected, about Yuna's focus on her art taking time away from their marriage, about Minji understanding him in ways Yuna couldn't anymore. Each word landed like a physical blow, but Yuna sat motionless, letting him talk himself into circles. When he finally ran out of words, Yuna stood up. "I want you to leave," she said simply. "Tonight. I'll tell Sujin you had to go on a business trip." Dongmin tried to argue, but something in Yuna's expression stopped him. He packed a bag while Yuna stood in her studio, surrounded by blank canvases she'd been saving for a series she'd planned to start. The empty white surfaces seemed to mock her now, reflecting the void opening up in her life. Through the studio window, she watched Dongmin load his bag into his car. Part of her wanted to run after him, to demand more explanations, to understand how he could throw away 12 years of marriage. Instead, she remained still, her reflection in the window overlapping with the blank canvases behind her. After his car disappeared for the second time that day, Yuna heard small footsteps in the hallway. She turned to find Sujin standing in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Yuna touched her cheek, surprised to find it wet. She hadn't realized she'd started crying. Sujin approached cautiously, her small face pinched with concern. Yuna pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're tired," Yuna explained, forcing a smile. "Would you like to sleep in Mommy's room tonight?" Jean nodded, and Yuna led her daughter back to the bedroom, leaving the empty canvases behind. That night, as Sujin slept peacefully beside her, Yuna stared at the ceiling, her mind racing through memories of her marriage, searching for signs she might have missed, moments she could have changed. The weight of uncertainty pressed against her chest. How would she tell Sujin? How would they manage financially? What would their families say? But beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper fear. Who is she now, if not Dongmin's wife? The identity she'd built over 12 years of marriage seemed to dissolve, leaving her adrift in unfamiliar waters. The only constant was Sujin's steady breathing beside her, anchoring her to the present moment. 2 weeks after Dongmin's departure, Yuna stood in her studio, a paintbrush hovering over a blank canvas. The morning light filtered through the large windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. She had always found solace in painting, but now her creativity seemed locked behind a wall of grief. Each time she tried to paint, her mind replayed scenes from her marriage, analyzing every moment for signs she should have noticed. The canvas remained stubbornly white, much like the other 5 she had attempted to fill over the past days. Her usual vibrant colors sat untouched on her palette, dried and cracking at the edges. The studio, once her sanctuary, felt more like a prison of memories. Every corner held remnants of her old life: the chair where Dongmin used to sit and watch her paint, the small table where Sujin would draw while Yuna worked, the window seat where she had planned their future together. Frustrated, Yuna set down her brush and began packing her supplies. She needed to get out of the house, away from the suffocating emptiness of blank canvases. After arranging for her neighbor to watch Sujin, who was engrossed in her Saturday morning cartoons, Yuna grabbed her smallest canvas and headed to the nearby park. Perhaps a change of scenery would break through her creative blockade. The park bustled with weekend activity: children playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly men playing chess at concrete tables. Yuna found a quiet spot under a maple tree, setting up her portable easel with practice movements. She had just positioned her canvas when a gust of wind caught it, sending it tumbling across the grass. The canvas rolled to a stop at a pair of polished leather shoes. Their owner, a tall man in a charcoal gray suit, bent down to retrieve it. As he straightened, Yuna found herself looking into warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, holding out the canvas. His voice carried a gentle authority that matched his professional appearance, but there was something approachable in his expression. "Thank you," Yuna replied, taking the canvas. Their fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, and she felt an unexpected jolt of awareness. She quickly attributed it to simple embarrassment. "I'm Kiwoo," he introduced himself, gesturing to the blank canvas. "Are you starting something new?" The question carried genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Yuna glanced at the empty canvas and felt the weight of her creative block pressing down again. "Trying to," she admitted. "Though lately, it seems the canvas wins more often than I do."
Kyo nodded thoughtfully.
"Sometimes the hardest part of creating is facing the empty space," he said. "It holds all possibilities, but also all our fears of failure." His words struck a chord. Yuna looked at him more carefully, noticing the subtle signs of someone who understood art beyond surface appreciation. The way his eyes assessed the quality of her canvas, how he stood at the optimal angle to avoid casting shadows on her potential work. "Do you paint?" she asked. A shadow passed across his face, quick but noticeable. "I used to," he answered. "Now I mostly collect and appreciate." Speaking of which, there's a new cafe around the corner that displays local artists' work. Would you like to join me for coffee? Perhaps seeing other artists' work might help spark some inspiration. Yuna's initial instinct was to decline. She had only been separated from Dongmin for 2 weeks. Wasn't it too soon to be having coffee with another man? But something in Kiwoo's manner put her at ease. He carried himself with a quiet confidence that didn't demand anything from her. "I should get back to my daughter," she began, but Kiwoo's face lit up. "Of course, family comes first. But if you change your mind, the cafe is called The Canvas. They make excellent Americanos." He pulled out a business card and handed it to her. The embossed lettering identified him as the CEO of a major corporate group. Yuna took the card, surprised by his position. He didn't fit the stereotype of a corporate executive. There was an artistic sensitivity about him that seemed at odds with the business world. As she slipped the card into her pocket, she found herself saying, "Perhaps another time." Kiwoo smiled, and for a moment, the weight of her recent past felt slightly lighter. "I look forward to it," he said, then checked his watch. "I have a meeting to attend, but it was a pleasure meeting you." "Yuna," she supplied. "Yuna," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. With a slight bow, He turned and walked away, his suit jacket catching the morning breeze. Yuna watched him disappear down the park path, then turned back to her blank canvas. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of creativity stirring. She picked up her brush and began to paint, not thinking about technique or composition, just letting the colors flow. By the time she finished, she had created a small but striking piece, an abstract representation of broken pieces coming together to form something new. That evening, as she cleaned her brushes and put away her supplies, Yuna found herself looking at Kiwoo's business card again. The embossed letters caught the light, and she remembered the warmth in his eyes when he talked about art. She placed the card in her desk drawer, telling herself she was just being practical, keeping it for networking purposes. But part of her knew she was lying to herself. 3 days after their chance meeting, Yuna found herself sitting across from Kiwoo at the Canvas Cafe. The walls displayed an eclectic mix of local artwork, creating an atmosphere that felt both inspiring and intimidating. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, using its warmth to steady her nerves as Kiwoo spoke about his company's recent art acquisition program. The corporate world can be suffocating, Kiwoo admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table surface. My father built the company from nothing, and now he expects me to maintain his legacy exactly as he would. But I've always believed business should contribute to culture, not just profits. Yuna noticed how his shoulders tensed when he mentioned his father. Is that why you started collecting art? She asked, recognizing a fellow soul trying to balance expectations with personal passion. Kiwoo's expression softened.
Partly.
Art represents freedom to me, the freedom to express, to interpret, to feel. He paused, studying her face. You understand that, don't you? I saw it in your eyes at the park, when you were facing that blank canvas. The observation caught Yuna off guard. She hadn't told anyone about her struggle to paint since Dongmin's departure, not even her closest friends. Yet somehow, this man she barely knew had seen straight through her artistic block to the pain beneath. I used to paint all the time, she found herself saying. Every emotion, every experience would flow onto the canvas. But lately, she stopped, unsure how to explain without revealing too much of our personal life. Lately, the emotions are too overwhelming to translate into art. Kiwoo suggested gently. Yuna nodded, surprised by his insight. How did you know? Kiwoo's eyes darkened with memory. I stopped painting when my mother died. The grief was too raw, too complex to capture. My father wanted me to focus on business anyway, so it seemed easier to just stop. The confession hung between them, creating a bridge of shared understanding. Yuna found herself opening up about her own situation, carefully at first, then with increasing honesty. My husband left me for our daughter's babysitter, she said, the words still bitter on her tongue. It's been 3 weeks, and I still catch myself turning to tell him something, or waiting to hear his key in the door. Kiwoo listened without interrupting, his presence offering comfort without judgment. When she finished speaking, he remained quiet for a moment before responding. Betrayal changes how we see everything, he said finally. Not just the person who betrayed us, but ourselves. We question every memory, every decision that led to that moment. Exactly, Yuna agreed, relief flooding through her at being understood. And now I have to be strong for my daughter, but sometimes I feel like I'm just pretending to be okay. How old is your daughter? Sujin is 6. She keeps asking when her father is coming home from his business trip. Yuna's voice caught on the last words. Kiwoo leaned forward slightly. You're protecting her while dealing with your own pain. That takes remarkable strength, Yuna. The simple acknowledgement of her struggle brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Yuna blinked them away quickly, focusing on her coffee cup. I've been thinking about your work, Kiwoo said, changing the subject with careful timing. Have you ever considered exhibiting your paintings? Yuna let out a surprised laugh. My paintings? I can barely finish one right now. Sometimes we need a goal to push through creative blocks. My company sponsors several galleries in the city. I could help arrange an exhibition. Nothing too large, just enough to get your work seen by the right people. The offer stunned Yuna. I don't know. My work isn't ready for public display. When was the last time you showed your paintings to anyone? Years ago, before I got married. Dongmin thought art should be a hobby, not a career. Ki-woo's expression hardened slightly at this revelation. And what did you think? The question made Yuna pause. She had buried her artistic ambitions so deeply during her marriage that she hardly remembered her original dreams. I wanted to tell stories through my paintings, she said slowly, to capture moments of transformation when life shifts and everything changes. Like now,
Ki-woo suggested.
Yuna met his gaze, seeing the challenge there. Like now, she agreed quietly. Then let me help you arrange the exhibition. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to share your vision with others who might need to see it. As Yuna considered his offer, she felt something shift inside her. A spark of possibility she hadn't experienced since before Dongmin left. The idea terrified and excited her in equal measure. Can I think about it? She asked.
Kyo smiled warmly.
Of course. The offer has no expiration date. He reached into his jacket and pulled out another business card. This one for an art gallery in the city's cultural district. This is where I usually arrange exhibitions. Visit when you're ready. See if you can imagine your work there. Yuna took the card, feeling its weight in her hand. The weight of potential, of change, of stepping into something new. As they left the cafe, Ki-woo asked if he could see her painting sometime. The request was professional, but his eyes held something more personal, something that made Yuna's heart beat a little faster. I'd like that, she found her self-saying, surprising herself with her honesty. Walking home, she realized she was already mentally sorting through her old works, imagining which pieces might be worthy of display. For the first time since Dongmin's betrayal, she felt like she was moving forward instead of just surviving. Over the next few weeks, Ki-woo became a regular presence in Yuna's life. Their meetings began as casual encounters at the campus cafe, but gradually evolved into longer explorations of the city's art scene. Ki-woo showed Yuna hidden galleries tucked away in narrow alleys, introduced her to local artists, and shared his extensive knowledge of art history. Each outing seemed to breathe new life into her creative spirit. One Saturday morning, while they were discussing potential venues for her exhibition, Sujin's babysitter called in sick. Yuna apologetically prepared to cancel their plans, but Ki-woo suggested including Sujin in their gallery visit. The suggestion surprised Yuna. She had carefully kept her daughter separate from this new friendship, uncertain how to navigate these unfamiliar waters. Are you sure? Yuna asked, watching Ki-woo's face carefully. She can be quite energetic. Ki-woo's eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. I'd love to meet her. Besides, children often see art in ways adults have forgotten how to. When they picked up Sujin, the little girl initially hid behind her mother's legs, studying Ki-woo with cautious curiosity. He knelt down to her eye level, pulling a small sketchbook from his briefcase. Your mother tells me you like to draw, he said, offering her the book and a set of colored pencils. Would you like to be our official art critic today? Sujin's face lit up as she accepted the gifts, her shyness forgotten. Throughout their gallery visit, she dutifully sketched her impressions of various artworks, occasionally tugging on Ki-woo's sleeve to show him her interpretations. Yuna watched their interactions with a mixture of joy and apprehension, noticing how naturally Ki-woo responded to her daughter's endless questions. During lunch at a nearby cafe, Sujin asked Ki-woo if he knew how to draw rabbits. Without hesitation, he picked up a napkin and sketched a series of playful bunnies, each with different expressions. Sujin giggled with delight, demanding more drawings and offering her own creative suggestions. You're good with children, Yuna observed later, after Sujin had fallen asleep in the taxi ride home. Ki-woo gazed at the sleeping child with a gentle expression. Children are honest in their emotions. They remind us how to be authentic. He paused, then added softly, She reminds me of myself at that age, always carrying around drawing materials. After that day, their outings often included Sujin. Ki-woo taught her simple sketching techniques, encouraged her imagination, and treated her opinions about art with the same respect he showed adult critics. Yuna found herself watching their growing bond with both gratitude and fear. Gratitude for the male presence in her daughter's life, and fear of how attached Sujin was becoming. One evening, as Yuna worked in her studio, she overheard Sujin talking to her stuffed rabbit. "Kiwoo Appa draws better bunnies than Daddy ever did," the little girl declared. The innocent observation sent a wave of conflicting emotions through Yuna. She hadn't realized how much Sujin had been comparing Kiwoo to her absent father. The relationship between them continued to evolve naturally. Kiwoo began dropping by with art supplies for Sujin, or bringing takeout dinner when he knew Yuna had spent all day painting. He seemed to understand instinctively when to maintain professional distance and when to offer personal support. During this time, Yuna's artwork underwent a transformation. Her paintings, once filled with safe, comfortable subjects, began exploring themes of change and renewal. She started a series called Metamo, Orphosis, capturing moments of transition in bold, confident strokes. Kiwoo watched her progress with obvious pride, offering thoughtful critiques when asked but never imposing his opinions. The turning point came during an impromptu painting session in Yuna's studio. Kiwoo had brought dinner, and while Sujin watched cartoons in the living room, they discussed potential pieces for the exhibition. As Yuna described her vision for a particular painting, Kiwoo picked up a brush and began adding subtle suggestions to her sketch. The intimacy of the moment, his hand moving across her canvas, their shoulders nearly touching, made Yuna acutely aware of their growing closeness. She found herself studying his profile, noting the concentration in his expression, the way his fingers held the brush with familiar expertise. "You miss painting, don't you?" she asked softly. Kiwoo set down the brush, his hand lingering on the easel. "Every day," he admitted. "But seeing you rediscover your passion helps fill that void." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Sujin's voice called from the living room, breaking the spell. Kiwoo stepped back, maintaining the careful boundaries they'd established. That night, after Kiwoo had left and Sujin was asleep, Yuna sat in her studio staring at the canvas they'd worked on together. His subtle additions had enhanced her original concept while respecting her artistic voice. The collaboration felt natural, like their growing friendship. Yet beneath the surface, she recognized the complications of their situation. Her recent separation, his position as her potential exhibition sponsor, Sujin's increasing attachment to him. Looking at her recent works arranged around the studio, Yuna realized that Kiwoo's influence extended beyond their artistic collaboration. His presence in their lives had brought color back to her world, helping both her and Sujin heal from Dongmin's abandonment. The question was whether she was ready to acknowledge what that might mean for their future. 2 months after Dongmin's departure, Yuna received an unexpected text message while preparing for her exhibition. "Can we talk? I've made a terrible mistake." The message arrived just as she was finishing a particularly powerful piece for her Metamorphosis series, and her hand trembled, causing a stray line across the canvas. The timing of Dongmin's message wasn't coincidental. Through mutual friends, he had learned about Yuna's upcoming exhibition and her connection with Kiwoo. The corporate world in Seoul was small, and news of the prestigious CEO's involvement with his estranged wife had apparently reached him. Yuna sat in her studio for hours, staring at the message. Outside, autumn leaves scattered across the garden where she and Dongmin had once planned to build a greenhouse. The memories of their shared dreams felt distant now, like watching scenes from someone else's life. She didn't respond to the message, but more followed over the next few days. "Minji and I broke up. I realize now what I threw away. I miss Sujin. I miss our family. You were always the one who understood me best." Each message carried the weight of their shared history, threatening to unravel the progress Yuna had made. She found herself unable to paint, her thoughts scattered between past and present. Kiwoo noticed her distraction during their exhibition planning sessions, but didn't press for explanations. The situation came to a head when Dongmin appeared at Sujin's school during pickup time. Yuna arrived to find him waiting by the gate, looking simultaneously familiar and foreign in his business suit. Sujin spotted him first, her excited cry of "Daddy," echoing across the schoolyard. Yuna watched her daughter run to her father, feeling as though she were observing the scene through glass. Dongmin hugged Sujin tightly, his eyes meeting Yuna's over their daughter's head. The love and familiarity in Sujin's reaction struck Yuna like a physical blow. Despite everything, he was still her father. "We need to talk," Dongmin said quietly, still holding Sujin. "About our family." Yuna agreed to meet him at a nearby park, primarily to avoid making a scene at the school. As Sujin played on the swings within sight but out of earshot, Dongmin began his carefully prepared speech about change and growth, about realizing his mistakes and wanting to rebuild their family. "Minji was a fantasy," he admitted, his voice heavy with rehearsed remorse. What we have, is real. I was a fool to throw it away." Yuna listened silently, studying the face she had once known better than her own. She could see the sincerity in his expression, the genuine regret in his eyes. 3 months ago, these words would have been everything she wanted to hear. Now, they felt like lines from an old script that no longer fit the play. "What about Kiwoo?" Dongmin asked finally, an edge creeping into his voice. "People are talking about how much time you spend together." "Kiwoo is helping me with my exhibition," Yuna replied carefully, watching Sujin pump her legs on the swing, reaching higher and higher. "He believes in my art. And I didn't." Dongmin's tone carried a defensive note. "I supported your painting. You tolerated it," Yuna corrected gently. "There's a difference." The conversation continued in circles, with Dongmin alternating between remorse and subtle accusations. He spoke about therapy, about understanding his actions better now, about wanting to be a better husband and father. His words were perfect, but something fundamental had shifted within Yuna. That evening, after an emotional goodbye with Sujin and promises from Dongmin to visit again, Yuna found herself at the Canvas Cafe. Kiwoo was there, as she had known he would be, working on exhibition details. He looked up as she entered, his expression changing from welcome to concern as he read her face. "Dongmin came back," she said simply, sitting across from him. Kiwoo's hands stilled over his paperwork. "I see," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you okay?" The question, so simple yet so profound, broke something loose in Yuna. She found herself talking about the day's events, about the confusion of seeing Dongmin with Sujin, about the strange disconnect between her past feelings and present reality. "The hardest part," she concluded, "is that I understand him better now than I did during our marriage. I can see exactly why he did what he did. The gradual drift apart, the temptation of something new, the fear of facing our problems. But understanding doesn't mean I can go back." Kiwoo listened without interrupting, his presence providing the same steady support she had come to rely on. When she finished speaking, he remained quiet for a moment before responding. "Sometimes," he said thoughtfully, "understanding our past is exactly what we need to move forward. It doesn't mean we have to repeat it." His words resonated with the turmoil in Yuna's heart. She thought about her recent paintings, about the themes of transformation and renewal she had been exploring. Perhaps this moment was another metamorphosis, another step in her journey of becoming someone new. "I need to focus on the exhibition," she said finally, "and on being there for Sujin. Everything else can wait." Kiwoo nodded, returning to his paperwork with practiced professionalism. But beneath his composed exterior, Yuna caught a glimpse of relief in his eyes, and she realized that her decision about Dongmin's return affected more lives than just her own. The week before the exhibition brought a frenzy of activity to Yuna's studio. Canvases in various stages of completion lined the walls, each representing a different phase of her journey through the past months. The metamorphosis, IES had grown to 15 pieces, ranging from small, intimate studies to large, bold statements of transformation. Standing in the center of her studio, Yuna felt overwhelmed by the task ahead. The gallery Kiwoo had arranged was prestigious, known for launching significant artistic careers. Critics would attend the opening, along with collectors and other artists. The thought of exposing her personal journey to such scrutiny made her hands shake as she adjusted a painting's position. "You're overthinking it," Kiwoo's voice came from the doorway. He had arrived early for their final review, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the campus cafe. He handed one to Yuna, then stood back to survey the collection. These pieces are strong. They speak truth. Yuna sipped her coffee, grateful for its warmth. They're very personal, she admitted. Maybe too personal. Everyone will see my pain, my confusion, my... She trailed off, unable to name the complex emotions captured in her work. Kiwoo moved to stand beside her, his shoulder nearly touching hers as they contemplated the paintings. Art should be personal, he said quietly. That's what makes it universal. Everyone who sees these will find their own story in yours. The largest piece, positioned centrally, showed a woman emerging from a chrysalis, her form simultaneously breaking down and reforming. The background shifted from dark, turbulent colors to increasingly lighter, more hopeful tones. Yuna had painted it during the weeks following Dongmin's attempted return, pouring her conflicting emotions into every brushstroke. This one needs to be the centerpiece, Kiwoo said, gesturing to the chrysalis painting. It's the heart of your transformation. As they worked together arranging the pieces for transport, Yuna noticed how naturally they moved around each other, anticipating each other's needs without speaking. Kiwoo seemed to understand instinctively which paintings belonged together, creating a narrative flow that enhanced the impact of each piece. The afternoon light was fading when Sujin returned from her after-school program. She burst into the studio with her usual energy, but stopped short at the sight of the nearly empty space. "Where are all the pretty pictures?" she asked, her lower lip trembling slightly. Kiwoo knelt down to her level, pulling out the sketchbook he had given her weeks ago. "They're going to their new home at the gallery," he explained. "Remember how we talked about sharing art with others? Your mother's paintings are going to help a lot of people feel less alone." Sujin considered this, flipping through her own drawings. "Can I come see them in their new home?" "Of course," Yuna said quickly. "You'll be my special guest at the opening." The little girl's face brightened. "Can I wear my pink dress? The one with flowers?" "It's a perfect occasion for the pink dress," Kiwoo agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement when they met Yuna's. Later that evening, after Sujin had gone to bed and the last paintings had been carefully packed for transport, Yuna and Kiwoo sat in the quiet studio. The space felt different without the artwork, emptier, but also full of possibility, like a blank canvas waiting for new stories. What if no one understands them? Yuna voiced her deepest fear. What if they just see a divorced woman's therapy paintings? Kiwoo was silent for a moment, his profile thoughtful in the dim light. "Do you remember what you told me about art that first day in the park? About wanting to capture moments of transformation?" Yuna nodded, surprised he remembered that conversation so clearly. "These paintings do exactly that," he continued. "They're not just about divorce or healing. They're about the courage to break open and become something new." He turned to face her fully. "That's what everyone will see, the bravery of transformation." His words carried such conviction that Na felt some of her anxiety ease. She looked around the studio, remembering how empty it had felt after Dongmin left, how the blank canvases had seemed to mock her pain. Now, even with the paintings gone, the space felt alive with creative energy. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the exhibition, but for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Kiwoo's hand found hers in the growing darkness, his touch warm and steady. "You did all the hard work," he said. "I just provided the gallery space." They both knew it was more than that, but neither spoke the words hanging in the air between them. Tomorrow would bring the chaos of the exhibition opening, the scrutiny of critics, the judgment of the art world. But for now, in the quiet of the empty studio, they sat together in comfortable silence, their joined hands speaking volumes about transformation and new beginnings. The gallery hummed with opening night energy as elegantly dressed patrons moved between Yuna's paintings, their murmured conversations mixing with the soft classical music playing in the background. The space Kiwoo had chosen presented her work perfectly. The lighting highlighted the subtle color transitions in her pieces, while the arrangement created a natural flow that guided viewers through her artistic journey. Yuna stood near the entrance, wearing a deep blue dress that Kiwoo's personal stylist had selected. Sujin, resplendent in her promised pink flower dress, stayed close to her mother's side, occasionally offering her own artistic commentary to amused guests. The little girl had appointed herself as an unofficial docent, proudly explaining to anyone who would listen that these were her mother's butterfly paintings because they showed how people could change into something beautiful. Several art critics had already approached Yuna, their questions probing beyond the surface of her work. One particularly influential reviewer spent 20 minutes discussing the technical aspects of her chrysalis painting, noting how the textural elements created a sense of emergence and renewal. His evident appreciation of the deeper meanings in her work helped calm some of Yuna's earlier anxiety. Kiwoo moved through the crowd with practiced ease, introducing Yuna to key figures in the art world and skillfully directing conversations toward her artistic process rather than her personal story. His presence provided a steady anchor throughout the evening, though he maintained a professional distance that respected both their positions. The exhibition was proceeding perfectly until Yuna noticed a ripple of tension move through the crowd near the entrance. Looking up from her conversation with a potential buyer, she saw Dongmin standing in the doorway, wearing an expensive suit and carrying a large bouquet of roses, the same flowers he used to bring home when asking forgiveness during their marriage. Kiwoo noticed Dongmin's arrival at the same moment. He started moving toward Yuna, but stopped when he saw her subtle head shake. This was her moment, her triumph, and she needed to handle this situation herself. Dongmin approached slowly, his eyes taking in the gathered crowd, the prestigious setting, and finally, the paintings themselves. He stopped in front of the chrysalis piece, his expression darkening as he absorbed its meaning. Sujin, spotting her father, started to run toward him, but Yuna gently caught her hand. "Sweetheart, why don't you show Kiwoo Oppa your special drawing?" Yuna suggested, grateful when Kiwoo immediately understood and led an eager Sujin toward the small refreshment area where her sketchbook lay. Dongmin watched this interaction with narrowed eyes before turning to Yuna. "Impressive exhibition," he said, his tone carrying an edge. "I suppose I have Kiwoo to thank for this opportunity?" "The opportunity came because of my work," Yuna replied quietly but firmly. Kiwoo simply provided the VE. "New. And so much more, it seems." Dongmin thrust the roses toward her. Several nearby guests pretended not to watch while obviously listening to every word. "You've moved on quickly." The accusation in his voice sparked something in Yuna. She looked at the roses, beautiful, expensive, and completely wrong for the moment, just as they had been wrong every time he'd used them to paper over problems in their marriage. "I haven't moved on," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I've moved forward. There's a difference." She gestured to the paintings surrounding them. "These aren't about moving on from you, Dongmin. They're about finding myself again." "Finding yourself?" He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, it looks like you've found a wealthy CEO who can advance your career." The cruel words hung in the air, drawing shocked looks from nearby guests. Yuna felt heat rise to her cheeks, but not from embarrassment, from anger. She looked at her ex-husband, really looked at him, and saw what she had missed during their marriage. His inability to understand that her art wasn't about him, that her growth wasn't about him, that not everything in her life revolved around him. "You never understood," she said softly, almost pityingly. "My art isn't about advancing a career. It's about telling the truth. Every painting here is a piece of my truth, including the pain you caused when you betrayed our family. But they're also about hope, about transformation, about finding strength I didn't know I had." Dongmin's face flushed. "I made a mistake."
Eve apologized.
"What more do you want?" "I don't want anything from you anymore," Yuna realized as she spoke the words. "Except for you to be a good father to Sujin. That's all." Kiwoo appeared then, his presence solid and reassuring without being intrusive. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his tone professional but with an underlying note of protectiveness. Dongmin looked between them, his expression shifting from anger to something like resignation. Without another word, he placed the roses on a nearby table and walked out, leaving the bouquet behind like an abandoned symbol of their past. A moment of awkward silence followed his departure. Then an elderly art critic stepped forward, gesturing to the chrysalis painting. "The interplay of light and shadow in this piece is remarkable," she said loudly, deliberately changing the focus. "Tell me, Ms. Yuna, what inspired your use of texture here?" Gradually, the crowd's attention returned to the art. Kiwoo squeezed Yuna's hand briefly before moving away to continue his hosting duties. Sujin returned to her mother's side, chattering about the snacks and the drawings she'd made. Looking around the gallery, at her work displayed so beautifully and at the genuine interest in the viewers' faces, Yuna felt a profound sense of rightness. The confrontation with Dongmin, rather than ruining the evening, had somehow completed it. His appearance and departure felt like the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. A final metamorphosis captured not on canvas, but in the reality of her life. The days following the exhibition opening brought a whirlwind of changes to Yuna's life. Reviews in major art publications praised her work's emotional depth and technical sophistication, with several critics particularly noting how her Metamorphosis series captured universal themes of transformation through deeply personal moments. 3 of her pieces sold on opening night, and inquiries about commissions began flooding in through the gallery. In her studio the morning after the exhibition, Yuna found herself looking at the single rose she had taken from Dongmin's abandoned bouquet, now sitting in a small vase on her windowsill. The flower represented something different now, not an apology or manipulation, but a reminder of her own growth. She opened her window and let the morning breeze carry the rose petal by petal into the garden below. Kiwoo arrived later that morning, carrying his usual coffee offering and a stack of newspapers featuring reviews of the exhibition. They sat in the quiet studio, sunlight streaming through the windows, as they read through the critics' responses together. His shoulder pressed lightly against hers as they shared particularly meaningful passages, their proximity feeling both natural and charged with unspoken possibility. "They understand," Yuna said wonderingly, reading a particularly insightful review that discussed how her work explored the intersection of personal trauma and universal experience. "They really see what I was trying to say." "Of course they do," Kiwoo replied, his voice warm with pride. "Truth resonates, especially when it's expressed with such courage." He paused, then added more quietly, "You were magnificent last night, especially with Dongmin." Yuna set down the newspaper, turning to face him fully. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," she said. "Not just the exhibition space or the introductions, but—" She struggled to find the right words. "You helped me remember who I was before I lost myself in being someone's wife." Kiwoo's expression softened as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, almost reverent. "You did that yourself," he said. "I just had the privilege of watching you bloom." The moment stretched between them, full of potential and unspoken feelings. Then, with a deliberateness that acknowledged the weight of the moment, Kiwoo leaned forward and kissed her. The kiss was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, Yuna found herself responding, her hands rising to rest against his chest as the kiss deepened. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Kiwoo rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "But I needed you to finish your journey first. To find yourself before we found us." The sound of small feet running down the hallway broke the moment. They moved apart naturally, without embarrassment, as Sujin burst into the studio. She was carrying her sketchbook and immediately demanded Kiwoo's attention to show him her latest drawings. As Yuna watched them together, Kiwoo's patient attention to Sujin's artistic explanations, her daughter's obvious adoration of him, she felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the rushed passion of her youth with Dongmin, but something more mature, built on mutual respect and understanding. Later that evening, after Sujin had gone to bed, they sat in Yuna's small garden. The night air carried the scent of late autumn flowers, and distant city lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Kiwoo held her hand as they discussed the future, not just the practical aspects of her burgeoning art career, but their personal future as well. "We should take things slowly," Yuna said, thinking of Sujin and the complexities of blending their lives. There's so much to consider. Kiwoo squeezed her hand in understanding. We have time, he assured her. I'm not going anywhere. The promise in his words warmed her more than any passionate declaration could have. They sat together in comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of the future while savoring the present moment. The garden around them was preparing for winter, but Yuna felt like spring was just beginning in her heart. That night, after Kiwoo had gone home, Yuna stood in her studio, looking at the empty spaces where her exhibition pieces had hung. She could already see new paintings forming in her mind, not born of pain this time, but of hope and possibility. The blank canvases no longer seemed intimidating but inviting, waiting for her to tell new stories of transformation and love. She touched her lips, still feeling the echo of Kiwoo's kiss, and smiled. Her journey of metamorphosis wasn't ending with the exhibition. It was simply entering a new phase, one where she could explore joy as deeply as she had explored pain. The thought filled her with creative energy, and she found herself reaching for her brushes, eager to capture this feeling of new beginnings on canvas. The success of Yuna's exhibition brought a period of joy and creative flourishing, but reality intruded one rainy morning when Kiwoo arrived at her studio, looking unusually troubled. His normally immaculate suit was slightly rumpled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested a sleepless night. He held his phone in his hand, gripping it as if it carried bad news. "My father had a stroke," he said without preamble, his voice tight with concern. "He's stable, but the doctors say he'll need extensive rehabilitation. The board expects me to take over as acting CEO immediately." Yuna guided him to sit on the studio's worn leather couch, the same one where they had spent countless hours discussing art and life. She listened as Kiwoo explained the situation, his father's condition, the company's precarious position during this transition, the weight of expectations suddenly pressing down on him. "I've been avoiding this responsibility for years," he admitted, running a hand through his usually perfectly styled hair. "Managing the art acquisition program was my compromise with my father. I got to stay connected to the art world while learning the business.
But now
you have to step fully into his role," Yuna finished softly, understanding the conflict in his eyes. She had seen glimpses of this tension before, in the way he sometimes looked at her paintings with barely concealed longing, or how his hands would move unconsciously as if holding a brush while discussing technique. Kiwoo nodded, his shoulders heavy with responsibility. "The company employs thousands of people. My father built it from nothing, and now its future rests on my decisions." He turned to look at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "But taking on this role means less time for." He gestured around the studio, encompassing not just the art but their relationship as well. Yuna took his hand, feeling the slight tremor in his fingers. "Tell me about your art," she said gently. "The art you used to create before you joined the company." The question seemed to surprise him. For a moment, he was silent, and Yuna thought he might deflect as he had done before when she asked about his artistic past. But perhaps the weight of his father's condition and the impending responsibilities made him ready to share this part of himself. "I used to paint under a different name," he said finally. "Jean Ho Park. My father didn't approve of my artistic pursuits, so I kept it separate from our family name." The revelation hit Yuna like a physical shock. Jean Ho Park was an artist whose work she had admired in her early 20s, whose bold, emotionally raw paintings had influenced her own artistic development. His mysterious disappearance from the art scene had been much discussed in creative circles. "You're Jean Ho Park?" she whispered, memories of his paintings flooding back. "Your series on industrial transformation and human connection. It inspired me to start painting seriously." Kiwoo, Jean Ho, looked at her with a mixture of pride and sadness. "Those paintings were my response to my father's world. I saw beauty in the intersection of commerce and humanity, but I also saw the cost. When he had his first health scare 5 years ago, I put down my brushes and fully joined the company. It seemed like the dutiful son's choice." Yuna stood up and walked to her reference shelf, pulling out an old art magazine. She flipped to a dog-eared page featuring one of Jean Ho Park's most famous works, a massive canvas showing workers leaving a factory, their figures simultaneously solid and dissolving, suggesting both permanence and transformation. "This piece got me through my first year of marriage," she said, showing him the magazine. "When I was struggling to balance my art with Dongmin's expectations, it reminded me that different worlds could coexist, that transformation didn't mean losing oneself." Kiwoo touched the magazine page gently, as if reconnecting with a lost part of himself. "I have a private gallery," he said quietly, "hidden away in a building I bought years ago. All my work is there, gathering dust. I haven't shown it to anyone since I stopped painting." The admission explained so much. His deep understanding of her artistic process, his ability to see layers of meaning in her work, the sadness that sometimes crossed his face when watching her paint. Kiwoo wasn't just an art appreciator or collector. He was an artist in exile from his own creativity. "Show me," Eunice said impulsively. "Show me your gallery." He hesitated. "The company needs me right now. The board is meeting this afternoon to discuss the transition." "The company has waited this long," Yuna insisted gently. "Give yourself this morning. Before you step into your father's role, reconnect with who you are beneath all those expectations." Something in her words seemed to reach him. Kiwoo made a phone call, rescheduling his morning appointments. Then he drove them to an unassuming building in a quiet neighborhood. The gallery inside was perfectly maintained despite its apparent abandonment, climate-controlled, properly lit, but feeling more like a mausoleum than a living artistic space. As Kiwoo led her through his collected works, Yuna saw his journey as an artist unfold before her. The paintings revealed a soul deeply attuned to the complexity of modern life, seeking beauty in unexpected places. They also showed an increasing tension between artistic expression and duty, culminating in his final piece, an unfinished canvas that seemed to cry out with suppressed creativity. Standing before this last work, Kiwoo spoke softly. "I always thought I had to choose art or duty, creativity or responsibility. But watching you these past months, seeing how you've integrated all parts of yourself into your work, maybe there's another way." Yuna squeezed his hand, understanding that this revelation wasn't just about art. It was about finding a way to be whole, to honor both his responsibilities and his true self. The challenge ahead would be helping him find that balance, just as he had helped her find hers.